Before we talk about adjusting and painting and any other thing that you can do to change a picture in Photoshop, the first thing you need to know how to do is select objects and make selections in general. So let's talk about the different ways that you can make selections. So the first thing that you can do is drag out the marquee tool. The marquee tool also has an ellipse and these single row columns. We're not going to need those. You probably won't really need these, but let's just talk about it. So if I drag out a box, and now we see these marching ants, whatever is inside this box is the selection. If I want to paint inside, if I want to paint in Photoshop right now, I'm just going to get my regular round default brush tool, since that's what you guys have. Anyway, if I start painting, notice you only see, it's only allowing me to paint inside this box. I'm going to hit undo. You also don't generally want to paint on top of your picture. You're going to want to paint on another layer, and that way you can move this. So I'm going to deselect this by going to select, deselect. The shortcut is Command D on a Mac and Control D on a PC. And now, because these are on two different layers, I can move this and I haven't ruined my picture at all. I'm going to delete that. Okay, the next way that we can make kind of more specific selections, because the rectangle and the circle tool and the ellipse marquee tools, they aren't usually so useful, because how often do you actually have a perfect rectangle to select? So then we get to our more specific polygon lasso tool, the regular lasso and the magnetic lasso. Now, if you have a tablet and you're working with on an iPad or with a stylus, then the lasso tool is really natural and it gets great curved lines. But if you're using a trackpad and a mouse like I'm using, it can be very difficult to control the polygon lasso tool, the regular lasso tool. So I prefer using the polygon lasso tool. It's the one that I'm using right now, and it works a little bit like the pen tool. And what it lets me do is just drop points and create a shape. Now, if I accidentally, let's say I drop a point in the wrong spot, I can hit delete, 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 and just delete as many times as I need until I get to where I want. And then I can continue making a selection. So I'm selecting these books right now. And these books are working pretty well with the polygon lasso tool because it's made of mostly straight edges. And something to note is that whenever you're making selections in Photoshop, the more accurate you are, the better your adjustments will look ultimately. So I'm just going to keep dropping points until I finish this big selection. And now I'm going to get this bookmark. And we can zoom in and zoom out as we need to. I'm zooming in on my trackpad. That zooming you can also do by hitting Command plus or Control plus, and then to zoom out you can hit Command minus or Control minus. Anyway, so now we see that this shape is inside the marching ants. Marching ants indicate whatever is in the selection. So I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to hit the paint bucket tool. Note that if you're opening Photoshop for the first time, it will probably look like the gradient tool, so you just have to click out and get the paint bucket. And then we can paint this in. Now, this isn't necessarily what I want to do, but it could, be the start of something. Once I have this shape here, I can change. Let me go to select and then go to deselect. So now it's not selected anymore. Now that I have this layer here with paint on it, I can change the blending mode. So now I've colored all of my books by putting a colored shape on top of them and changing the blending mode. Okay, and then there are two other ways that we can select things. So we have these quick selection tools, and these are so convenient. They work under kind of specific circumstances. For them to work, there needs to be high contrast between the thing that you're trying to select and the background. This actually should work pretty well, but let's look at them. So we have something called the object selection tool. And the object selection tool is artificial intelligence technology. And what you do is you scroll over the shape that you want, and Photoshop is going to do its best job to select it. And this did a pretty good job. It's pretty close to what I want. It's not perfect. So now what I'll do is edit this shape using the polygon lasso tool. Now this is something that I didn't talk about before, but something you can do with the polygon lasso tool is add to your selection and subtract from your selection. So first we're going to talk about subtracting. If you hold down, or let's look up here, if you look up to the top to the control center, you'll see these icons. This one's the selected one, and it's the adding. This one is subtracting. So the other way that you can do this is by holding your modifier keys. If you hold down Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, you'll see that you can get the subtraction tool, the subtraction polygon lasso tool. You can also just choose it on top. And what this lets you do is take away from the selection. So I don't want that to be part of the selection, and now I have to close that. I don't want this. This is not a clean line, so I'm going to edit that away. And something that I didn't point out before, but I'm going to point out right now, is when you want to close your shape, you can hover nearby and see that when there's that circle around, that means that you can close the shape. And now we've subtracted. That's true for when you're making your shape in the first place and when you're editing it later. So now I'm going to change to the plus tool so I can get my bookmark in. I'm also going to come up here because this gave me a pretty rough edge for this book, which in Photoshop's defense, it's a pretty well-loved book that has seen better days. So what Photoshop is seeing is the weathered edges, and that's not Photoshop's fault per se. Okay, so I could keep going forever until I'm happy with this, and I'm just adding to the selection, and the more accurate your selection, the better it will look. Okay, I'm going to make another layer, and we can fill this in. So I'm going to hit G to get my paint bucket and fill this in. Now, there's one other way that we can edit shapes, and it's really convenient, that we can select shapes. It's very convenient, but it requires you having selected it already. So I'm going to turn this one off. And these don't actually need to be on for this to work, but if you have a selection that you've already made, you can hold down Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, and if you hit the thumbnail, it's going to select whatever is on the thumbnail. So any pixels that are on the thumbnail will be part of the selection. So that means that, let's say I wanted to do that for this JPEG that I put in. If I hit Command, it really just selected the entire. If I hit Command and select this JPEG, it doesn't do anything because the entire JPEG, the entire layer is full of information, so it doesn't really work. But for something like this, where we have this great selection, by holding down Command, that modifier key, you are able to make a selection again. And that can be very useful when you're making adjustments and masks. So those are the things that we need to talk about in terms of selecting objects in Photoshop.